Hey there, and welcome to True Scary Stories. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That helps YouTube know you love creepy stories, and it'll keep sending more your way.
Five disturbing California horror stories. Story 1. The Joshua Tree Hiking Trail. What I'm about to tell you happened just outside of Joshua Tree National Park in Southern California. And honestly, this is one of those stories that makes me question everything about what we think we know about wilderness and safety. The person who lived through this requested anonymity, so I'm going to call him Marcus. And Marcus's story is, well, it's unnerving. It was October 2019 when Marcus decided to take a solo hiking trip out to one of the lesser-known trails near Joshua Tree. He wasn't an expert hiker, but he wasn't inexperienced either. He'd done maybe a dozen hikes before. He packed plenty of water, told his roommate where he was going, and had his phone fully charged. Everything by the book. The hike was supposed to take maybe 3 hours round trip. Marcus started around 7 in the morning when it was still a little cool out. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting these long shadows across the desert landscape. He felt good, energized. It was one of those mornings where you feel small in nature, in a good way. About 40 minutes into the hike, Marcus noticed something. He was being followed. Not by a person he would have heard footsteps. It was more of a presence. He kept catching movement in his peripheral vision. Every time he'd turn to look, there was nothing, just rocks, cacti, and sand, but the feeling didn't go away. Marcus told himself he was being paranoid. The desert does that to you sometimes. It plays tricks on your mind. So he kept walking, kept climbing. The trail wound through these narrow passages between massive rock formations, beautiful but isolating, very isolating. Then he heard it, a sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was like breathing, heavy breathing. Not human breathing exactly, but something close to it, almost like something was mirroring his own breaths. Whenever he breathed in, it breathed in. Whenever he breathed out, it breathed out. Marcus's heart started pounding. He stopped walking. The breathing stopped too. He started walking again. The breathing returned. This went on for maybe 10 minutes. Marcus was terrified. He looked around frantically but still saw nothing. No animal, no person, no explanation, just empty desert. He decided to turn back. This was supposed to be fun, and it wasn't anymore. Something felt wrong. As he turned around to head back down the trail, he looked behind him, just a casual glance back, and that's when he saw something that made his blood go cold. About 50 feet back, barely visible against the rocky terrain, was a shape. It was roughly humanoid, but tall, way too tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching him. Marcus ran. He didn't think, didn't consider his footing or the uneven terrain. He just ran. His water bottle fell out of his backpack. His phone almost slipped from his hand. He didn't care. Behind him, he could hear that heavy breathing again, getting faster, more intense. When he finally burst out of the trail entrance and made it back to the parking lot, his car was the only one there. He sat in the driver's seat for probably 20 minutes, just shaking, just trying to breathe normally. Every few seconds, he'd look in the rearview mirror, expecting to see that thing walking toward him across the parking lot. It never came out of the trail. Marcus waited until other hikers started arriving around mid-morning before he felt safe enough to drive away. When he got back to the car, he checked his phone. One missed call from his roommate. The timestamp said it came through 5 hours earlier, but Marcus had only been hiking for maybe 2.5 hours. He'd lost track of time completely. He never went back to that trail. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night about this story. Marcus went home and looked up reports about that specific area, and it turns out he wasn't the first person to report something like this. There were stories going back years, people describing the same thing, a presence, a tall humanoid figure in the rocks, a sense of being hunted. What was following Marcus that day? What was that breathing sound? And most importantly, did Marcus actually escape, or did he just run in a different direction?
Story 2: The Abandoned Malibu Mansion. Our second story takes us to the wealthy coastal towns of Malibu, California, where multi-million-dollar homes sit perched on cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. This is a place where celebrities live, where the wealthy retreat for privacy. But sometimes, isolation can turn a home into something darker. In the summer of 2018, a real estate agent named Jennifer, actually, that's her real name, she's agreed to have it shared, was handling the sale of an abandoned mansion. The property had been listed for over 3 years with no serious interest, and for good reason. The house had been built in the 1970s by a tech mogul who became something of a recluse. He lived there alone for decades. The staff quit one by one, each leaving under unclear circumstances. Eventually, he died in the house. He wasn't found for weeks. When authorities finally went in, they found him in the master bedroom, naturally decomposed. After that, the house sat empty. The property manager tried to prepare it for sale, but there were incidents. A contractor quit mid-job, refusing to ever return. A cleaning crew reported unpleasant odors that wouldn't go away no matter how much they cleaned. The neighborhood kids started a rumor that the house was haunted. Jennifer was a skeptic about all of this. She was a professional. She had sold plenty of problem properties. She scheduled a showing for a potential buyer on a Tuesday afternoon. The buyer was a tech entrepreneur looking for a project home. Jennifer arrived early to make sure everything was in order. She used her key to unlock the front door. The house smelled stale, like no one had opened a window in years. The air felt thick. Jennifer walked through the entry hall, turning on lights as she went. Dust covered everything. The furniture that had been left behind was covered with white sheets, making it all look like ghost furniture. As she was walking through the living room, she heard something from upstairs. A sound like footsteps. Someone walking across the hardwood floor above her head. Jennifer stood very still. She called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" No response, but the footsteps stopped. She told herself it was probably just the house settling. Old homes make sounds, that's normal. She went upstairs to do a final walkthrough before the buyer arrived. The master bedroom was in the back of the house, overlooking the ocean. As she walked down the hallway, she noticed something odd. One of the bedroom doors was slightly open. She was certain it had been closed the last time she was here. Jennifer pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, except for an old bed frame and a nightstand, and lying on the nightstand was a framed photograph. Jennifer picked it up. It showed a man in his 60s, smiling at the camera, standing in front of this very house. On the back, someone had written a date, 23 years ago. She put the photo down and turned to leave. That's when she noticed it. The smell. It came out of nowhere. The sickly sweet, unmistakable smell of decay. Not old decay, fresh decay, like something had died recently. Jennifer ran out of the room and back downstairs. She called the potential buyer and made an excuse. She couldn't do the showing today. She didn't know why, she just knew she needed to leave. But before she left the house, she made one phone call. She called the property manager and asked him to check the crawl space under the house. She just had a feeling. 2 days later, the police found the remains of a transient in that crawl space. He'd been dead for approximately 3 to 4 days. How he got in or how long he'd been living in the house before dying was unclear. But here's what bothered Jennifer most. When the police asked her how she knew to check the crawl space, she couldn't explain it. She just knew. Or rather, something made her know.
The house never sold. It's still listed, by the way, though the price keeps dropping. But Jennifer doesn't work in real estate anymore. She said there's something about that house that isn't right, and she's pretty sure it's still there, still waiting for someone to come back.
Story 3. The Hitchhiker on Interstate 5. I-5 is the main highway that runs the entire length of California, connecting everything from the Mexican border all the way up to Oregon. It's a necessary road, but it's also notoriously eerie at certain hours. Lots of long stretches of nothing, especially through the Central Valley. This story happened on one of those stretches. There's a truck driver named David who has been driving that route for over 15 years. He's logged probably 100,000 miles on I-5 alone. He's a seasoned professional, never had an accident, always alert. But one night in 2017, something happened that shook him to his core. He was driving north around 2 in the morning, heading through a particularly isolated stretch of highway between Bakersfield and Fresno. It was the kind of night where the road is completely empty. No cars, no lights from towns, just his headlights cutting through the darkness and the sound of the engine. That's when David saw the figure on the side of the road. It was a woman, hitchhiking. She was wearing a white dress that looked almost vintage, like something from the 60s or 70s. Her hair was long and dark. She had her thumb out, standing in David's headlights, like she'd been waiting for him specifically. Now, David had picked up hitchhikers before. He was a cautious guy, but he wasn't unkind. And something about this woman, he felt compelled to pull over. He couldn't explain why. It was just a feeling he had. He slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder about 30 feet ahead of her. He looked in his side mirror as she approached the truck. She was moving slowly, almost floating across the asphalt. When she got to the passenger window, she didn't say anything. She just opened the door and climbed in. "Where you headed?" David asked, trying to keep his voice light and normal. "North," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost whispered. "I'm just going north." David didn't press for details. He pulled back onto the highway. The woman didn't say anything else. She just stared straight ahead at the road. They drove for maybe 30 minutes in complete silence. David had the radio on very low, just some country station playing softly. The woman never moved. She didn't adjust herself in the seat. She didn't look at David. She just stared. Then David felt it. The temperature inside the cab dropped dramatically. His breath became visible. He could see it fogging up the windshield. He turned up the heat, but it didn't help. The cold just kept getting more intense. Are you cold?" David asked, trying not to sound as terrified as he felt. The woman slowly turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were completely hollow. Not just the pupils, but the whole eye was black, completely black. And her skin, it had taken on a grayish tone, almost waxy. "I've been walking for a very long time. I've been waiting for a very long time." David's hands started shaking on the steering wheel. He couldn't take his eyes off the road, but he could feel her staring at him. The temperature continued to drop. Ice was forming on the inside of the windshield now. "Where are we going?" David heard himself ask. "North," she said again. "We're going north." David made a split-second decision. He swerved hard to the right, pulling off the highway and into the dirt. The truck bounced and kicked up dust. He slammed on the brakes and the truck skidded to a stop. When he looked over at the passenger seat, it was empty, completely empty. The door was still closed, the seatbelt was still buckled, but the woman was gone. David opened the passenger door and jumped out. He walked around the truck, looking at the ground, looking at everything. There was no sign of her, no footprints, nothing. The air around the truck was normal again, warming up as the sun started to creep toward the horizon. He sat on the side of that highway for 3 hours, just breathing, trying to understand what had happened. He never did pick up another hitchhiker.
He says there's something on that stretch of I-5, something that's been walking along that highway for decades, maybe longer, and it's always looking for someone to take it where it needs to go. To this day, David still drives that route, but he keeps his doors locked and his eyes on the road. He never, ever looks at the side of the highway.
Story 4. The Apartment Building in Silver Lake. Silver Lake is one of those neighborhoods in Los Angeles that's artsy and eclectic. It's got character, history, and a lot of older buildings that have been converted into apartments and lofts. But some of those buildings have histories that go deeper than the gentrification and the art galleries. There's an apartment building on a quiet street that from the outside looks fairly normal, maybe needs some paint, but nothing alarming. However, according to multiple residents over the years, something is deeply wrong inside those walls. I'm going to tell you about a woman named Nicole who moved into apartment 3B in the spring of 2016. She found the place online. It was affordable for Los Angeles, had hardwood floors, and the landlord seemed pleasant enough. She signed a 6-month lease and moved in. The first week was fine. Nicole unpacked, set up her furniture, started to make the space her own. But on the second week, she started noticing things. There was a smell in the apartment. Not overwhelming, but definitely there. A sour, organic smell that seemed to come from the walls themselves. She mentioned it to the landlord. He said it was probably just the age of the building, that he'd have someone look at it. No one ever came. The smell got worse. Nicole bought candles, opened windows even though it was warm outside, sprayed air freshener. Nothing helped. It just seemed to get stronger at night, particularly around 3 a.m. Around that same time, Nicole started hearing sounds, footsteps in the hallway, dragging noises like something heavy was being moved across the floor. The neighbors on either side of her, she discovered, were very quiet. She'd hear their televisions on occasion, but she never saw them. Their names weren't on the mailboxes. When she tried knocking on their doors, no one ever answered. Nicole started asking other residents in the building. Most of them were evasive. One older woman who lived on the first floor finally told her something. She said the building had had several tenants die in their apartments over the years. Nothing suspicious, just tenants who stopped paying rent and were found after landlords went to investigate. One apartment, the woman said, on the second floor, had been vacant for 3 years because nobody would stay in it, not after what happened there. Nicole felt a chill run down her spine, but she told herself this was an old building in a big city. People died. That was just a fact of life. But the sounds and the smell persisted, and Nicole started to have dreams. In these dreams, she'd be walking through the hallway of the apartment building, but it was different somehow. The walls were a sickly color, and the doors to the other apartments were marked with numbers that didn't match reality. She'd walk deeper and deeper into this hallway, and at the end of it, there was a door that looked like the entrance to her apartment. But when she opened it, she wouldn't be inside her place. She'd be in a room that looked older, dirtier, and there would be a figure standing in the corner. She could never see its face clearly, but she could feel its attention on her, weighing on her, suffocating her. She'd wake up gasping for air. This went on for weeks. Nicole barely slept. She looked gaunt, exhausted. She knew she needed to move out, but something was keeping her there. Not fear exactly, but a kind of pressure, a feeling that if she tried to leave, something bad would happen. One night, a Thursday night, Nicole remembers exactly because she'd called her mother that afternoon. She was lying in bed around 2:45 a.m. She couldn't sleep again, and she heard something different from the hallway. Not footsteps, breathing. Heavy, wet breathing coming from somewhere very close to her apartment.
She got out of bed and walked to her front door. There was a peephole. She looked through it. The hallway was empty, but the breathing continued. It was coming from right outside her door. Nicole stepped back, her heart pounding. She waited. The breathing went on for maybe 2 minutes, then silence. And when she looked through the peephole again, the hallway was darker than it had been before, much darker. That was when Nicole broke her lease and moved out. She couldn't explain why to the landlord, she just said she had to go. He didn't seem surprised. He said that was fine, that someone else would probably take the apartment soon enough. Nicole never found out what was in that building, but she says that at 3 a.m., if you drive past that address, you can sometimes see lights on in apartments that should be empty, and if you listen carefully, you might hear that breathing coming from somewhere deep inside the walls.
Story 5: The Desert Photography Trip. Our final story happened more recently, in 2022, out in the Mojave Desert. It involves a photographer named Alex who loved shooting landscapes. The Mojave, with its stark beauty and unusual formations, was one of his favorite places. But one trip out there turned into something he's never quite recovered from. Alex planned a solo photography expedition into a relatively remote area of the desert. He wanted to capture sunrise and sunset, catch the golden hour light on the rocks. He'd done this before. He knew the risks, brought plenty of supplies, and had informed his gallery owner about his plans and when he'd be back. He set out early on a Friday morning in October, driving deep into the desert toward an area known for its unusual rock formations. The road became less and less developed the further he went, eventually turning into just a dirt path. He drove as far as he could, then parked and set out on foot with his camera equipment. The landscape out there is beautiful but eerie, rock formations that look like they were carved by an alien hand. The sand is fine and pale. There's almost no vegetation, no sound except for the wind. And that wind, it plays tricks. Sometimes it sounds like voices. Alex found a great spot and set up his equipment. He took photos for hours, losing himself in the work like he always did. The light was incredible. He felt fortunate to be there, to witness it. As the sun started getting lower, Alex decided to explore a bit more. He'd seen some interesting rock formations about a quarter-mile away. He figured he could hike over there, maybe get some more shots before the light faded completely. That's when he found the camp. It was set up in a little alcove between two massive rock formations. There was a tent, a sleeping bag, some scattered gear, but nobody was there. And the camp looked old, like it had been abandoned weeks, maybe months ago. Alex is a cautious person by nature, but he couldn't help his curiosity. He looked around the camp. In the tent, he found a backpack. Inside the backpack were some clothes, a wallet, a phone. It was completely dead, wouldn't charge. The wallet had an ID. It belonged to a man named Robert Chen, reported missing from Barstow 3 months earlier. The missing persons report was one of those that made local news briefly before disappearing. A man from the city decided to go hiking, never came back. Alex immediately called the police on his cell phone. He gave them his location and told them what he'd found. The police said they'd send someone out, but it would take time. They asked him to wait there. But Alex didn't feel comfortable waiting. Something about that abandoned camp didn't sit right with him. The gear looked weathered, but the tent fabric had no tears. The sleeping bag was zipped up tightly. It looked like someone had just left in a hurry and never came back. As the sun dropped lower, Alex decided to make his way back to his car before it got dark. The police could search the camp properly. He didn't need to be there. But as he started hiking back, he noticed something. The landscape looked different.
He'd hiked in what he thought was a straight line from his car, so logically, a straight line back should take him back to his car. But nothing looked familiar. He checked his phone for GPS. No signal out there. Alex kept walking. He told himself he'd recognize the area once he got back to it, but every rock formation looked the same. Every dune looked identical to the last one. The sun was dropping faster now, the light turning that orange-pink color that happens just before dusk. Then he heard it. A voice. Someone calling his name. Alex! Alex! He spun around. There was no one there, just empty desert stretching out in every direction. Alex started walking faster. His camera equipment bounced against his chest. He wasn't thinking about getting photos anymore, or finding the abandoned camp, or finding his car. He just wanted to get away from those voices. And then, suddenly, he broke through a ridge, and there it was, his car, sitting exactly where he left it. He'd made it back. Alex threw his equipment in the back seat and started the engine. His hands were shaking as he pulled away from that spot, driving fast, following the dirt path back toward civilization. But here's the thing that happened next, and this is what Alex says he can't explain. As he was driving back, he looked in his rearview mirror, and walking behind the car, keeping pace with him across the desert, was a figure, a man's silhouette, walking steadily, never falling behind, never speeding up. Alex accelerated. The figure kept pace. The road started improving as he drove, became paved again, but when Alex looked in the mirror once more, the figure was gone. Just the empty road behind him. When Alex got back to the city, he reported the location of the abandoned camp to the authorities. A search team found the site, and they did find the remains of Robert Chen. They ruled it a death from exposure and dehydration, an accident, but Alex has questions about that night that don't have answers. Why did he find the camp so easily? Why did those voices sound so familiar, even though he'd never heard them before? And most importantly, was he really alone in that desert, or was someone else out there, guiding him, keeping him, testing him? Alex doesn't shoot landscape photography anymore. He took up studio work instead. He says the desert isn't empty, it's full of things. Things that watch, things that wait, things that sometimes call your name. 5 stories, 5 glimpses into places in California where the ordinary world meets something else entirely. The hiking trails where shapes move in the rocks, the abandoned houses holding on to dark secrets, the highways where hitchhikers from another time still wait for a ride, the apartment buildings where something watches from behind the walls, and the deserts where voices call your name and figures pace beside you in the darkness. California is a beautiful state, but beautiful places often have the darkest shadows. Thanks for listening. Lock your doors tonight, and maybe think twice before exploring that remote trail or picking up that hitchhiker, because you never know what might be waiting out there in California. Stay safe out there.